Tato, I'm at Waipara. I'm here at the Mount Albert Research Centre, and we work for epidemiology and disease management, the EDM team at Plant and Food Research.
And I'm Rob Beresford. I work with Nick in the EDM team, and I'm a plant disease epidemiologist, and I work on effects of climate and weather on diseases and disease management.
So we're here today to talk about Myrtle Rust, a reasonably recent disease that's arrived into the country. Both Nick and Rob are specialists in this area, and they're just going to give us a little bit of a, 101 about what the disease is, where it came from, and what programs are currently underway.
So when did it arrive, Nick?
Well, we've been tracking this spreading around the globe for quite a few years. I think Hawaii, it was the early 2000s, then it came into Australia
2010
and then finally blowing, we assume, through the wind currents onto Raoul and the Kermadex in 2017, and then a little bit later into the mainland of New Zealand, Kerikeri, up at a nursery where it was first detected, but that's at least our first detections of it.
Yes, and it appeared in several centres in fairly quick succession, didn't it, between May and June, July 2017. It turned up in Taranaki and Bay of Plenty, and so it's gradually been spreading since then. I think it's in most North Island regions now, I understand. It's finally got to Hawke's Bay and to Waipara, I believe.
And then down into the Nelson, Tasman, upper west coast area too. So
yes, Greymouth as well.
It really has got around the Motu or the various parts of New Zealand.
So what are the main plant species that the disease impacts on?
So it's only Myrtaceae, which is the myrtle family, but it's a very diverse family, and it's got all sorts of different plants in it. So far in New Zealand, we've seen it on Pahutukawa, particularly young ones, like young plants. We don't seem to see it on the adult trees very much at all. But also the two Blophomerta species, which are Ramarama and Rahutu, both of which are quite popular garden plants, aren't they? And they are very susceptible to it.
And what's the time of year that you're most likely to see the disease occurring?
Certainly, it appears towards the end of spring, early summer, so that's November, December is when it gets going each year. It goes quiet over the winter in New Zealand with our cooler winters. Actually, that's an important point about Myrtle Rust. It's actually a subtropical pathogen that's come from Brazil originally. So it likes warm temperatures. It's been very problematic in Queensland and Australia. So our temperatures are usually a little bit cooler than it prefers, so it slows right down in the winter, starts to get going in late spring, summer, and goes right through into the late autumn.
And that's an important aspect around seeing it on the new flush of spring growth, isn't it?
Yes,
the new leaves.
Yes, and that's another really important point about its biology, is that it can only infect growth flush, so young flush leaves and stems at the tops of plants. So if the plants aren't growing, they won't get Myrtle Rust, even if it's a susceptible type. And so when they go into their spring growth flush, that's when the disease starts to build up. And we actually see two distinct epidemics here in Auckland, certainly, where it'll hit the spring growth, it'll kill off all the spring growth by about Christmas or January. Then it goes quiet, and you might see a lot of dead growth, but you don't see any of the actual yellow Myrtle Rust spores. Then it gets going again about this time in March, and it can continue to build up right through April, and then it starts to slow down in May with the cooling temperatures.
So is it something that you would only experience in the spring and summer months within the Auckland climate?
That's certainly when it's at its most noticeable, spring and, late spring and then again in autumn is when it's most noticeable.
And for other parts of the country? For those of the membership and viewers that might be listening in from around the country?
So as we go further south, as it gets cooler temperatures, going at higher latitude and higher altitude for that matter, the season over which it develops shortens, so it gets shorter. It also becomes less active over the winter period, and so it gets quite a distinct seasonal kind of occurrence, and it's a shorter period, so it doesn't seem to develop quite as severely further south.
And from a control perspective, obviously MPI is the national body that looks at incursions into the country. Is it still part of that programme of monitoring?
No, MPI finished their surveillance August 2018, and there's been no really systematic surveillance for its spread since then. However, there are some. There is a public website, iNaturalist, where current records are being deposited, and that's very important. And we encourage people to use iNaturalist to report it. If you're going to put a report on an observation on iNaturalist, you need to take some good photos, and then it gets verified as to whether it's Myrtle Rust or not, and then it goes into the record books as being another place where it occurs.